Hi, and welcome to part 2 of this video. If you haven't watched part 1, I'll drop the link in the description below, or click here to go and watch it and then you can come back. If you've already watched part 1, let's proceed. During the events of Hotline Miami 2, we play as Beard in missions that take place between the Soviet-American conflict, where he's part of an elite unit sent to take on suicide missions, but against all odds, coming out on top. Beard, for what we may think of him, he's somewhat of a pacifist. He doesn't enjoy the killing, he just wants to end this and go home and open a shop or anything that doesn't involve using a weapon on other humans. He works more of an antithesis towards Jake. Beard is also not confronted by Richard, but for the whole opposite reasons. Beard takes no joy in taking a human life. He only does it because he's currently stuck there in the middle of a conflict. He does it out of preservation, not out of a consciousness. But still, no amount of morals or consciousness could help him avoid his fate during the bombing of San Francisco, which was an event that occurred almost at the end of the war that the US lost, where after hanging up on a call speaking with Jacket on the other line, he steps out of his convenience store only to be vaporized alongside other people in the parking lot. Beard serves the purpose of regular people pinned against each other against their will. Beard, even though he's a soldier, he doesn't enjoy being one. Like a lot of people don't enjoy serving in an armed conflict for the political interests of the higher-ups. Detective Pardo is an enigma throughout the whole game, since he's following a case of a mass murderer known as the Miami Mutilator, but he tends to be reckless in the way that he does his job. He doesn't wait for backup, uses violence as the first and only method, has no rules of engagement clearly laid out, and he's more of a shoot first, ask questions later kind of detective. But by the end of his arc, we find out that the Miami Mutilator was in fact Detective Pardo all along, where he made a grave mistake seemingly by leaving a bullet case and prints that might get traced to him eventually. The confrontation with his conscience is not throughout Richard, but in a dream sequence through a puppet that is supposed to be Pardo's real thoughts and actions, confronting him with his hypocrisy towards society by embodying the Miami Mutilator. Pardo wakes up from the nightmare on October 28, 1991. He's completely paranoid and barricades himself in his apartment, aiming his revolver at the door for whenever the cops decide to show up. But that moment never arrives because later that day, Miami is eradicated by a nuclear explosion, taking Pardo out in the blast. Pardo wanted fame at any cost, and he got obsessed with the case of the masked maniac that Jacket protagonizes in the first game. So he attempted to emulate Jacket to get notoriety even if it was indirect. In the end, Pardo maybe didn't want to get out of the cycle of violence per se, but the fact that he got paranoid the morning after his nightmare indicates that he didn't want to be part of the meat grinder in the end. Pardo represents the hypocrites in society, those that claim to be good and do good with the authority given to them, but in the end they are just animals waiting to come out, whom eventually, like Icarus, fly too close to the sun and they end up burning their own wings and falling down to the ground. Evan Wright, for the outsider, might look like he's a good person, and to a degree he is. He's for the majority of the time a pacifist looking to write his book, and actually his gameplay focuses on non-lethal combat. If he picks up a gun, he will unload it. He doesn't pick up lethal weapons, and the only weapons he uses, he only injures his opponents with them. But there is a clear issue with Evan. He has anger management issues. This is portrayed in the first mission we play as him, where the bouncer of the building doesn't let us in, and the only response Evan gives is beating the guy to a pulp. Now, yes, we can agree that he tries to provide the man with aid in the moment, and rushes into the building looking for help, claiming that an accident happened, trying to avoid responsibility for what he did to the man. During his mission, we can perform executions to our enemies, either with a blunt weapon or barehanded. That ends up in Evan killing them. And if we do this twice, Evan drops the act of having morals and becomes a lethal gameplay, using every weapon available, including guns. When Evan is confronted by his conscience, he is met with Richard and a vision of his wife Sharon. The events take place in a train cart where a homeless man gets close to him and asks for money. Evan attempts to give the man some money only to be met with Richard claiming that he doesn't want his dirty money. I emphasize in the word dirty not only because he's associated with a crook detective, but because he's willing to drop any morals or priorities over his book. Then the vision changes to Sharon, who says that they can barely afford to pay rent and this is no time to chase a book when they have mouths to feed, and threatens to leave him. Evan doubles down on his book, saying that this book will be good and that he only needs some time, only for Richard to reappear and tell Evan that time is not something that he has, and maybe he should reconsider what he thinks is a priority in his life. By the end of Evan's storyline, Evan has all the information regarding the events of the first game, including the perspective of Richter's encounters with 50 blessings, giving him all he needs to write a masterpiece. And then he reads a note left by Sharon, and the note says that she has left with their kids, and despite loving him, she can't live with someone who focuses more on a book rather than his own family. Here, the player can choose to go to the typewriter or go to the phone and call Sharon. This doesn't grant you anything in the moment, but the scene for October 28th will change depending on the chosen option. If the player went to the typewriter, we'll see Evan alone in his study working on his book when the atomic blast wipes him out. If the player chooses the phone, the final scene with Evan will be of him at his dining table with his family enjoying a meal before being wiped out by the atomic blast. Evan's case is a weird one because he technically wasn't in a cycle of violence. Sure, he used to be a war journalist, but seemingly he has always been a pacifist. But his ambitions of becoming a known writer is what leads him to a path of violence, where he believes that his book is worthy of any pain anyone else has to endure. Lastly, on Hotline Miami 2, we have Richter. Richter is a character that appears in the first game and serves as an antagonist towards Jacket by murdering the girlfriend and shooting Jacket inside of his apartment. But now on the fifth act called Intermission, we see his side of the story, giving a bit of humanity to his character. In this chapter, we learn about Richter's relationship with 50 Blessings, and how in the beginning the tasks were simple, until it became about hurting people. But Richter quickly learned that refusing to follow orders was a grave mistake that was heavily punished when he finds his car completely torched. Richter had no other option but to take on the jobs they gave him, since Richter's mom was apparently sick and frail, and only Richter could and would take care of her. In the end, Richter got in a lot of trouble and ended up in prison. Until one day, a mutiny took place and Richter was able to sneak out and flee to Hawaii. Richter, after confessing everything to Evan, asks for a flight ticket for his mom to bring her with him. In the final cutscene with Richter, we can see that Evan was true to his word, where we can see Richter in a small house on the shore with his mom sitting on the couch next to him. Richter is confronted by Richard in the last seconds of his life, where Richard starts taunting Richter, but Richter doesn't seem surprised at all. In fact, he seems calm and accepting of any form of punishment the world has in store for him due to his acts of barbarism and brutality. And Richard's attitude changes to a more comforting attitude by saying, "Leaving this world is not as scary as it sounds," right before the bombs drop and the nuclear apocalypse begins. This confrontation, I see it more of Richter acknowledging that he won't escape the violence he inflicted, and he won't pretend like he is justified. Even if his cause was noble by caring for his mother, he is aware that violence leads to more violence, and this does nothing more than escalating to a point where only tragedy comes out of it. So he sees no point in struggling against the consequences of his own actions. Now, we'll be passing down to the last two playable characters from the series to explore, Biker and Jacket. I wanted to start from the second title, first of all because the meat and bones of the story comes from Biker and Jacket's story and repercussions. And also, I played Hotline Miami 2 first, years ago. And after replaying it recently, I bought the first one a few days ago, and as I'm writing this, I'm still playing through it even though I already know what this whole story is about. Biker, even though he appears after Jacket's storyline in the main game, I'd like to talk about him before, because like Beard, Richter, and Jake, he's never confronted by Richard. The safe reason for this is because the devs never thought of giving Biker a confrontation with his conscience, but for the sake of his video we'll put this truth aside. Biker, in one of his first dialogues when we play as him, we find out he got into 50 Blessings for fun. While he's intimidating what seems to be another 50 Blessings member, he's yelling at him because, and I quote, "You told me it would be exciting, didn't you? Well, I'm fucking bored." He doesn't seem to be upset about the fact that he's killing people. He's not feeling remorse, he doesn't feel threatened, he's bored and he hates to be a puppet. That's why he wants out of the gigs. Biker didn't feel cheated on, because he didn't know he would be killing people. He just got bored. He wants excitement in his life, and he doesn't find it in stuff like partying or riding a bike. He wants the extra stuff. What kind of extra? Well, beats me, but he clearly wants excitement, and the gigs from 50 Blessings ain't cutting it for him anymore. In the end, Biker is a sociopath that looks for his next adrenaline rush, and this is reinforced in his gameplay, where he doesn't use any other weapon besides a butcher's cleaver, which is clearly not a weapon that kills quickly most of the time. And to be good at using knives and throwing them, I assure you, the guy knows how to defend himself. He could use firearms if he wants to, but he finds the use of a knife more thrilling than a bullet. In the end, the lack of confrontation with Richard or any other form of consciousness is because he lacks any. Biker is willing to hurt someone else, reaching borderline torture, just to get an exciting feeling out of it. There is nothing to confront and no one to take on the role of something missing in someone's head. In the end, Biker's demise can be assumed was the atomic destruction of the bombs, but this is unknown since first, one of his appearances in Hotline Miami 2 takes place in a surreal place known as the Bar of Broken Heroes, where we can see characters that would not share a friendly space between each other, or some not even being alive at that point in the story, like Beard, or who seems to be the homeless man from the first game. But nonetheless, if he did die in the atomic blast, it still is an outcome expected for a character like him who sees other people's lives as an excuse for a thrilling ride. Jacket is the main protagonist of the story. Everything revolves around his actions for both the first and second title, and he is a silent protagonist with barely any personality. So everything here would be difficult to dissect without jumping into assumptions of who he is or what he thinks. Jacket's character centers around destroying the Russian mafia, maybe willingly, maybe not. He seems to be a puppet throughout the first game, but everything starts to make sense once we understand Beard's story and what happened to him, when and where. Beard was Jacket's friend, maybe his only friend. Like the moments between the missions imply during his recap of the events prior to waking up in the hospital. They both served together in Hawaii during the Soviet-American War, undertaking suicidal missions day in and day out, and a strong bond formed between the both of them. This is solidified in the moment when Beard saved Jacket's life on the last operation together while taking over an enemy power plant. In 1986, Jacket was going through a rough breakup, and to add insult to injury, San Francisco was nuked in the last days of the war. Amongst the numerous casualties, one of them stands out for the player and for Jacket, and this casualty is Beard. This could be a very strong reason for Jacket to develop hatred towards the Russians, and a reason that he thinks justifies joining 50 Blessings. Maybe not out of patriotism, but for revenge. Let's not forget that Jacket's emotional stability seems to depend completely on the female affection. We can see this contrast in Jacket's apartment from the beginning of the game, where everything is messy and dirty, all the way to when Richter kills Jacket's supposed girlfriend, where everything looks nicer and better. So we have an emotionally dependent man with a military background, which doesn't help to the mental stability issue, who is out for revenge for the loss of a close friend. But maybe Jacket doesn't necessarily want justice nor revenge, he only wanted an excuse. Why do I say that? Well, let me explain myself. In every revenge story in the entertainment media, there is always someone who did the act that hurts the protagonist, and to whom the protagonist has a desire for revenge. For example, there is characters like Don Chicho in the second film of The Godfather, the Yote 6 in Ghost of Yote, Abby in The Last of Us, and many, many more stories. But Jacket targets the Russian mafia. That, yes, it has a leader which Jacket terminates by the end of the game, but in the end the boss and the grandfather didn't do anything to hurt Jacket. Sure, they behave like any mafia does by doing shady businesses like money laundering, manufacturing substances, selling stuff in the black market, weapons and people trafficking, and so on. But the Russian mafia, as far as we the players know, didn't choose to nuke San Francisco. This was an act of war, a crime of war surely, but not an act targeted specifically to hurt Jacket as an individual. Jacket prides himself on being a man of morals for an apparent cause. This is noticeable once he kills the homeless man in the alley and puking after it, which is seen as a physical symptom of disgust. We could think this is a sense of disgust from the gore after killing the man, but Jacket didn't vomit when killing all the mobsters during the mission, and let's not forget that he has a military background in an elite unit. He saw his fair share of carnage back in Hawaii. So maybe it is an effect of the adrenaline? Might be, since with the adrenaline levels going down on your body, your blood flows to the digestive system, and a symptom of this can be vomiting. And after vomiting, what does Jacket do? We see the man doing grocery shopping, renting VHS movies, having 1 or 2 drinks, as if nothing happened. So I think it is logical that Jacket only wanted an excuse to deal with his pent-up rage in a self-destructive way, and the safest way in Jacket's mind was joining 50 Blessings, not knowing they would send Richter to get rid of him. The 3 confrontations with Richard are different to the other characters, since it is no longer only Richard working as the character's consciousness. Rasmus and Don Juan are present, where Rasmus acts like self-hatred and Don Juan as self-care or self-love. As for Richard, he serves as a reality check. Ironically enough, he's the masks off kinda guy, no going around in circles and goes straight to the point. Even though Richard can be a bit cryptic by asking questions, he puts Jacket's brain to actually ponder on these. The most clear example is the question, "Do you like hurting other people?" which is by far in the fandom one of the most iconic quotes and something that pretty much engulfs all the sense of Hotline Miami. In the end, Jacket, while in a prison cell, is met with the same fate as some of the cast members in Hotline Miami, with an atomic bomb erasing them from existence during a coup that starts with the death of the presidents of the United States and Russia. In the end, Jacket was only a cog in the machinery of violence in the world, a cycle that did nothing but escalate, as it is the nature of violence. It is unclear if Jacket actually wanted to escape from the cycle of violence by claiming the blackmail from 50 Blessings as seen in court in Hotline Miami 2, or if he thought that in jail he would get away from everything. Assuming that is the case, Jacket was wrong. And like Richter, he was caught up with his actions eventually. And just like Richter, Jacket had a big part in the final outcome of the nuclear apocalypse in the game, by supporting the acts and beliefs of 50 Blessings. There was never a chance of a happy ending for these characters because they helped the violent tendencies of man bring the worst of them in a self-imposed lie to justify bloodshed. Some of them, as stated in the beginning of the video, had more chances than others to refuse engaging in violence, but in the end all of them chose, and all of them chose wrong. Thank you so much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Please remember to give a like if you enjoyed the video and share it with your friends, or share it with your enemies if you didn't like it so that you can ruin their day. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so that you would get notified every time a video is uploaded. This has been Dorgig speaking to you. Have a great day, take care, bye bye.